All right, joining me on the pod right now, he is a true friend of the program, and because of this pandemic, we can't be face-to-face yelling at each other, which probably works out well for me. He is Lou DiBella, president of DiBella Entertainment, longtime HBO boxing executive, and all-around good guy. Hall of Famer, by the way. Lou, I know you must be disappointed, Lou. You did the pandemic temporarily put off your induction into the Boxing Hall of Fame, but it'll happen. It'll happen at some point soon.
No, I'm just grateful to be in. I'll deal with the delay. Yeah.
Yeah. Before we get into anything else, you know, DiBella Entertainment is a small business, and you are affected by this pandemic as much as anyone, with boxing being put on hold and you know, the money flow not coming in. I mean, how has this affected your business and your ability to, you know, think in the long term?
Well, I have three primary businesses. I also have a production company, and I've been able to mess around a little bit in the production company, not make money, but at least play around. I have three businesses basically closed down. You know, I've been able to place some fighters, and I'm working real hard because the fighters need to eat to try to get them on some of these bubble situations that exist. I've been able to make some fights with my guys as opponents, but I can't afford to do a Broadway boxing or a UFC Fight Pass show with no gate revenue. The TV revenue is not healthy enough to support the testing, the purses, and the cost of events. So I can't do anything. In New York City and in New York State, the gyms are still closed. So boxing's really shut down here. I also own two minor league baseball teams. I'm the managing partner of two teams, the Richmond Flying Squirrels, San Francisco Giants AA team, and Montgomery Biscuits, Tampa Rays AA team. 2020 seasons totally canceled. So no revenue coming in until spring of 2021. God willing, we have a vaccine by then, and we can open up to the public. So it's beyond just suffering. It's trying to figure out how to keep things alive. I mean, I've had to, on the baseball business, I've laid off about 75 people, like furloughed, loads of people, a lot of them my friends. I mean, we need to continue to be visible in the community and serving the community during this, but we have no money coming in. It's been trying, but it is what it is, man. I ain't going to complain. People have it worse than we do.
Club shows, small shows, they're the lifeblood of boxing. It's where some of these young guys get their early opportunities, and you do it as well as anyone in boxing. I mean, it's just the revenue from the live gate is just what drives those shows, right? The inability to have that live gate just makes them impossible.
Makes it impossible. And additionally, look, right now they're starting to pop up with some local shows here and there, but I don't want to be too critical, but they're desperados a little bit because they're taking temperatures. It's sort of similar to the states that only take an eye test and a blood test. Those same states, some of them are running shows and they take your temperature, and if you don't have a fever, you can fight. I'm not going to operate that way. And the only way I would do a show right now is responsibly, and that means, the kind of bubble you're in Orlando right now, the bubble that Top Rank created, the bubble that they're creating for Showtime at the Mohegan Sun. Phenomenally expensive. You have to rent the property. You have to be able to test regularly. A lot of your fights are going to fall out. I mean, the economics of a small show just simply don't work. So it's not only me, but everybody that promotes, grassroots boxing. Look, I have a regular series televised. I mean, but I can't go. And it just is what it is. It's going to be, and I've spoken to a lot of my friends in the venue businesses. And honestly, the arenas and theaters aren't really gearing up to reopen so quickly.
How concerned are you for your business in the long term because of what's happened over the last 4 months and the uncertainty about when things could get back to normal?
I'm concerned. I have a lot of fighters under contract for an independent promoter. I don't have a exclusive streaming deal or TV deal, particularly one where I have deals, but I can't utilize them because the TV money doesn't cover the nut. I'm concerned. I'm more concerned for the fighters and I work with, and particularly the women. I mean, if you're a woman and you're not named Katie or Clarissa or Michaela right now, like 99.999% of the women are just sort of screwed. The men don't have enough platform right now. There aren't enough slots to take care of them in this environment. So I'm concerned about the women. I'm not that. I mean, I'll get through this. You know, the other thing is, like, I mean, I'm not. You know, I gave an interview. I was on a podcast, and you know me. I tend to be honest. Like, I was honest, and then the next thing I was reading an article on boxing, seeing someone saying I'm in fear of my life and career, and that I'm likely to be out of the business. No, but I am being philosophical. I'm not 35 anymore. You know, I turned 60 during this shit, and I'm not like, you know, I'm not going to wind up like Bob or Don in 87 in the saddle. That's not happening with me. So, you know, I'm going to be philosophical about things. I'm going to get myself through this. I'm going to do the best I can for my fighters and for my company. I'm confident that I'll get through this. I think the entire sports business and live event business is going to be suffering for a foreseeable period of time. I don't think we're going to have things exactly back to where they were, maybe ever. But in terms of getting to some semblance of normalcy, I think it's pretty clear that's not happening until there's a vaccine. And then, you know, how did all of this affect people's habits? Are people still going to be willing? For example, boxing tickets have always been extraordinarily expensive. A little bit less so for the kind of club shows I promote with regularity, but the bigger shows I was doing at the Barclays Center and the bigger shows I promoted in my career, the tickets are phenomenally expensive. Are people going to go back to paying $2,000 and $3,000 for a ringside seat to sit elbow to elbow? You know, time will tell. You know, interestingly, I think part of the reason why boxing is in such an interesting place right now is we were heading for an adjustment anyway. And you and I had talked about that in some of the podcasts we'd done a year or two ago, where I prognosticated, I think correctly, I mean, you didn't have to be a rocket scientist, that there was a bubble of crazy spending. The results didn't appear to be justifying the level of expense for anybody who was spending crazy, and that we were likely to be hitting a period of adjustment. Interestingly, I think we were hitting that period literally right as the pandemic laid its ugly, you know, self on us. And this has just exacerbated things and brought things about more quickly. You know, boxing's really in a situation of change, you know, where there's going to be an adjustment not only to sports in the world of COVID-19, but an adjustment to a new paradigm where funny money is not going to be spent, and that the performance of an event, the popularity of an athlete, is actually going to determine what he gets paid. So, you know, it's going to be a very interesting time when we are, you know, and now we're starting to get back to some regularity. Showtime put out a schedule. Fox is going to put out a schedule. Dazn's getting back to some shows in August. It's going to be interesting to see where things go the next year or two.
You know, you mentioned you had some fighters on as opponents in some of these shows that have already taken place. Top Rank just finished a 6-7 week stretch of doing fights twice a week in Las Vegas. What were your impressions of what Top Rank did and how they came back?
You know, I never believed anyone was, you know, Eddie was out there. Look, Eddie's like a P.T. Barnum. In a lot of ways, Eddie's the new Don King. I mean, Eddie's a carnival barker. He's a good-looking guy. He's great, you know, fast of, you know, his mouth is quick and he's facile and he's, you know, he's a P.T. Barnum-esque kind of guy. We're going to come back and only with the biggest fights. And no, you're not. And I said this all along. No, you're not. And everyone sort of knew it. And what Top Rank did was they were the first one back. So they're the first one that came back with product that was more affordable and allowed them more flexibility with all the other money that had to be spent on testing and everything else. And also, you don't want to bring back your superstar and then run a 50% risk his fight doesn't happen. So, like, you know, they were disadvantaged a little bit by being the first one out. And maybe if we were in a different world where someone in boxing, there was enough money behind boxing that someone was going to go out there and say, yeah, all right, we're doing our first event, so we're going to spend $1 gazillion and money be damned. But we weren't in a money be damned situation. We're in more of like I said, a period of readjustment economically. So I was impressed to a degree. I think that they attempted to do everything in a responsible, healthy way. I think that they were able not to cancel a single show, despite losing about 40% of their fights, 30 to 40% of their fights. I think you're seeing Showtime just took a hit and lost their main event the Saturday night. I think they learned some things watching Top Rank operate. And by not being first, they brought in a bunch of substitute opponents, believing, okay, they lost a third to 40%. We're not being any less, stringent. So we're likely to lose 30 to 40%. And they had fighters in waiting to step in. Now they have a good show Saturday night. It's the quality of the boxing. Tremaine Williams against now is fighting that kid in the main event. That should be a competitive fight. Tremaine's a good fighter, even though they had him as an insurance policy. It's not a big show, but it should be a decent boxing show. And I think they did a very strong job of substitution because they did what they should have done. Watch what Top Rank was doing, see the good things they're doing, but also see maybe where you think you can, based on what you're watching and the data you're gaining from watching those shows, making adjustments. And that's what they did. And I think that's going to be an advantage the people coming back later are going to have.
No, I think you're right. I think you're right about having a substitute opponent or having someone training inside the bubble is almost a necessary thing at this point. I mean, you have to assume that for every fight, there's a strong possibility you could lose one of the top fighters. You have to have somebody ready, willing, and able to go. I think that's an adjustment everybody needs to make moving forward on all these shows. The one thing I was curious about, as I mentioned at the top, you're a former television program at HBO as well. There was a lot of excitement about what the numbers could be for boxing based on what we saw on the early returns on what UFC did. They did some extraordinary numbers on some of their early shows on ESPN and the ESPN pay-per-view. It didn't translate that much in boxing. What do you read into that?
A bunch of things. Okay. But one of them I read into it, to be honest, is I think our hardcore fan base, I don't want to say it's shrinking, but I think it's limited. And one of the interesting things about the ratings for the ESPN fights were everyone was looking at them in a vacuum and comparing them to UFC. Look, UFC came back first. They came back bigger. Dana's a no fear kind of guy. It was like balls to the wall, best stuff we can put out here. We're going to put quality programming out there. No one at the point when they came out with their bigger shows, no one had been able to bet on anything for 3 or 4 months. And the numbers were enormous. And I also think they have a terrific marketing machine, and they're run by one entity. They're basically a near, I don't want to say monopoly legally, but they're, in terms of market power, they're like a monopoly. And boxing is completely diffused in terms of any kind of administration or management. We already have 4 and 5 champions in every weight class. And then when you're going down to the level below a championship level a little bit, and you're just trying to make decent fights, the fights are sort of fungible. The stuff ESPN was putting on wasn't that different from the stuff I was putting on Broadway boxing, with 1 or 2 exceptions. So I think that the numbers you saw from the ESPN ratings, if you'd looked at the ratings of FS1 before the pandemic hit, they were in that ballpark, similar to what ESPN just did. If you were looking at the ratings that Showtime was doing, and they didn't have their numbers weren't super last year. They had a little bit of an off year. I think that they may even be better with what's coming, but their numbers for show boxes and for their smaller championship boxings were also in that 300, 400,000 people range. You look at Wilder Fury 1, what did it do in that 300,000 range? You look at most of the pay-per-views in the last 5 years, and other than Wilder Fury 2, which had a ridiculous amount of promotion behind it from 2 mega networks, what were those pay-per-views doing? They were doing in that neighborhood of 250 to 400,000 buys. Well, is there a common thread here? And maybe the common thread is that our hardcore base that will watch everything has faded to that sort of the level. We clearly didn't capture the imagination of regular sports fans. We clearly didn't cross over with our early shows to casuals. That's something we got to work on. I mean, we got to take a look at that. I mean, we can't argue. When you look at the history of boxing over the last 100 years, we were the sport of kings. We were number one in that literally century sort of. If you're looking at a 100-year period, we early in the 20th century, we were still arguably the number one sport in America. Right now we're in that other sort of category when you go down the listing of sports. It says a little bit about the way that the perception of our sport. I don't think, I think that you're seeing the floor. You know what I mean? The numbers you're seeing right now for us are the floor. When you get out there with a Spence Garcia on pay-per-view, when you get out there with a Teofimo and Lomachenko, particularly if that winds up on ESPN itself, when Canelo comes back, particularly if he comes back in a real fight against the Callum Smith kind of guy, there will be more attention and there will be a larger base of people interested, and you'll see.
But then was this a wasted opportunity then? Because when they come back with those big fights you're talking about, the competition is going to be much stiffer than it is right now.
You can clearly argue that it was a wasted opportunity, right? I mean, you can argue that because if honestly, if this pandemic hit and this was 3 years ago and Dazn was in the beginning of its burst of spending, right? Not in the end, Dazn could have cleaned up right now. They could have come back, thrown on some huge stuff, thrown out. This would have been the time to put out $20, $30 million, not $300 million, but $20, $30 million, $5 or $6 million for a couple of super shows that preceded everyone else would have been a great opportunity. But Dazn wasn't in that economic situation at that moment. Neither was Top Rank and ESPN. A PBC, similar look, I think Heyman and the PBC guys, Al's always been very thoughtful and risk averse. He's careful. And I think that he waited, he watched, and then he now has acted and begun to come back. So it doesn't surprise me. I didn't expect anybody to grab the opportunity because grabbing the opportunity meant a lost leader, meant losing some money for a couple of months in order to gather the attention of the sports world. Would that have been good for the boxing industry? Yeah. But who's looking out for the boxing industry? Who runs the boxing industry? We have no league. We have no commissioner. We have no authority. We have 4 ratings organizations that are maybe more a part of the problem than they are of the solution. And some are way better than others of those 4. I don't want to put them all in one basket. I'd say that.
No, we can rate them in terms of shittiness. They're plenty shitty all around.
No, they're plenty shitty all around, but there's one that's shittier than the rest, and
yes.
but they're pretty shitty all around. But here's what I really do believe: they are not part of the solution. They have been part of a problem. A rational reboot of boxing wouldn't involve those 4 organizations, honestly. Maybe in the beginning as there's a transition, but if the sport ever took over, if there was ever a roll-up of boxing so that there was a commissioner, there was a structure, right? You wouldn't have the WBA, the WBO, the WBC, and the IBF, at least in their present, structures. So, I think boxing's eternal. I've said this a million times. People will always fight for other people's entertainment. I also think we predated every sport on earth, and there's more, theatrical, it's more of a theatrical nature, more poetry, more storylines. I mean, boxing there's a reason why so many movies, books, songs, everything have so much art is created around boxing because, there is a lot of meat to the bone. But as a business, we're in a very interesting and challenging and transformative time right now.
For the last couple of years, there's been a lot of money in boxing, and that's certainly great for the fighters. Networks want to be in the boxing business.
Double-edged sword.
Let me finish. Let me finish. Like, it's been networks want to be in the boxing business because it's relatively cheap programming compared to paying for rights fees for other sports. But it's created a bunch of separate leagues. I mean, can boxing can boxing actually get out of the rut that it's in, or expand the way it needs to, with so many broadcast partners that are out there? Is it even possible?
Not with the present paradigm. I mean, look, I've said this to the guys that run Dazn and who I like and I respect. I mean, Skipper is a terrific sports executive, and I respect the guys that run Dazn. You know, but starting a programming service with an exclusive contract, I'm not going to get into who it was with even, but I think the exclusivity of the ESPN deal, the exclusivity of the DAZN deals, the exclusivity of PBC, you know, and Al's a control freak. He's a brilliant guy, one of the smartest guys I've ever known. And I still call him my friend. You know, we have an interesting relationship over 20 years, but I do still consider him a friend, and we do still speak. But he's a control freak, and he would be the first to admit it if he ever talked to anybody. Those three avenues make it difficult for things to cross over and for the biggest fights to happen. You know, the amount of money that was spent over the last 3 or 4 years benefited a number of fighters, but particularly the ones that were already wealthy, like the ones that were already on the top of the ladder. It helps some other people. Some other fighters got the benefit of deals they never would have been able to make again, and never were able to make preceding that. But that money, that balloon of insanity is over. And why is it over? It's over because, honestly, DAZN didn't get a couple of $1 billion worth of results for the couple of $1 billion worth of spending in boxing. ESPN, like, I think they're okay. It's cheap programming, and you know, Aram can deliver regular product. But the ratings haven't been extraordinary. The pay-per-view performances haven't been extraordinary. The performance of even Wild Fury 2, which I guess did people say around 800,000 homes, something like that, given the amount, $50 million of value of promotion between ESPN and Fox, it was still sort of shockingly low. There's a reason for that. By not having an open marketplace, which would really sort of force the biggest and best fights to happen. If nobody had their exclusive multi-gazillion dollar deal where they can play in their own backyard without playing with everybody else, then you would see more of the best product. You know, when I look back, you know, you mentioned I get into the Hall of Fame. I think that's as likely as much of that was for my years at HBO and my success as a programmer at HBO as it was for my 20 years and success as a promoter. I think they both factored in. And then in that 11-year period I worked at HBO, we had no exclusive deals. And frankly, when Showtime made an exclusive deal with King in an attempt to beat us, or at least Jay Larkin was the head of Showtime Sports back then, Mark Greenberg was running the company, and they thought King had Chavez, King had Tyson, and that they could actually, you know, close that gap to HBO by an exclusivity with Dazn. We destroyed them after like it was worse for them after the exclusive deal, because I had everybody else open to me, and everybody willing basically to do and make the fights I mandated. I want to see this fight. I think it's big. Seth Abraham and I believe this is the biggest fight. You know, we had fights with Bob. There was a period of time for like 7 or 8 months where Bob was like, you know, you're not the matchmakers, you're not the promoter. If you don't want to buy it, don't buy it. Okay, we didn't buy it. Guess what? 10 months later, Bob was sitting at a table with us making some of the biggest fights of the 1990s, you know, because we had no choice. And I think these exclusive deals have actually killed boxing. I think if you look at the descent of HBO Sports, because, I mean, literally HBO had half a century as the television leader in boxing. I mean, over 40 years as the TV leader in boxing. You could almost time the HBO Sports demise to a decision to give an exclusivity to Golden Boy. And the quality of HBO products started to diminish. And by the way, it's not like a hit on any one promoter. It's just the exclusivity makes no sense. I mean, could you imagine, like, you have baseball, but the National League is exclusive to one network and the American League is exclusive to the other? Or the National League East is exclusive to Turner, but and then how do you have playoffs? How do you do anything? I mean, exclusivity has been a real problem. And I also think that there's a double-edged sword to the tsunami of money that was spent over the last 3 or 4 years, because it honestly didn't pay off. It didn't pay off for the people spending it, for none of them. And right now, there aren't streaming services and networks. Believe me, because I've tried to talk to everybody. And, you know, I had years as a TV executive, so my Rolodex is different than the average boxing promoter. You know, I mean, I know the TV guys who have been in the business a long time because I was a TV guy. And they're not lining up behind ESPN, PBC, and you know, or Fox/Showtime and Dazn right now to jump into boxing. They believe, probably correctly, too much money and attention's been paid to boxing over the last 3 or 4 years, and they're watching the results. You know, it's no accident. I do think, I mean, a lot of people think that, you know, I've gotten to know Dana a little bit over the years, and like, you know, we had different politics and different stuff, but I have great respect for him, and he's a charge forward kind of guy, very decisive, and you know, he comes to a conclusion, he makes a decision, and he sticks with it, and you know, I admire that. And when a couple of years ago, when he was really making noise about looking at boxing and wanting to get into it, like, I know that was true. I think that watching everything that's happened in the marketplace now, I think there's a reason why his interest in moving into that boxing world. He doesn't talk about that so much anymore.
All right, let me drill down on a couple things specific to you before I let you go. There was a lot of bad blood in the back and forth between Amanda Serrano and her team, Katie Taylor and her team. Katie's obviously moved on to fight a rematch with Delphine Persoon. Eddie was understandably upset about it to a degree, about how that whole fight fell apart. Do you believe that fight is revivable at some point, either later this year or early next year?
Probably not later this year, early next year. Knowing knowing Katie's management as well as I do, and knowing Eddie as well as I do, also seeing the move toward Persoon, and then the investment Eddie's making in Cecilia, who's fighting Jessica, who's a smaller girl, like more of a 40-pounder than a 47-pounder. I have a feeling that they're probably aiming toward a Cecilia fight, or the winner of Cecilia and McCaskill against Katie. And also, there was just a lot of bad blood. You know, I mean, do I think the fights? Of course, the fights revivable. I mean, you know, there aren't a lot of huge money fights in women's boxing, you know, even on the horizon, and that's still one of them. So, is it revivable? Yeah, I doubt that it's revivable in the next 18 months or so.
Okay, one of the bigger fights that could be on the calendar this year is a fight that you're still a part of. I mean, Tevin Farmer in a rematch against Jojo Diaz. There was some back and forth there with Jojo apparently looking for a way to not fight Tevin Farmer next and defend his belt against the mandatory challenger. Where does that fight stand? I mean, I see Jojo Diaz on social media constantly saying, I want the big fights. The first fight with Tevin was pretty good. I think the rematch would have some kind of interest. I mean, where does that fight stand?
I think that the fight will happen. You know, there's a contract for it, and they're going to have to honor that contract. I also think if the fight happens in the next 6 months, Jojo will not be stripped and lose his title. I think even the ruling that made the guy the mandatory, I think the fight doesn't have to happen for 7 or 8 months, or I don't know how much time, but it's a significant period of time. So there's plenty of time to schedule the Tevin fight. Look, I think part of it is Jojo beat Tevin. He may not have had a deal on paper for how much money he was going to get paid for the rematch. So even though Tevin, we had a deal for some certain in a contract, you know, and Golden Boy, clearly they've been very, you know, upfront in saying, yes, we committed Jojo to an immediate rematch. They haven't denied that. They've said that. So the fight has to happen. They have to get on the same page with their fighter. And I know from personal experience that you often have those bumps in the road, and, you know, and then people sit down and realize, okay, inevitably I have to fight Tevin Farmer. Now let's get this deal done. I think as soon as there's a date certain, and right now my understanding is that there's not any date certain for U.S. DAZN shows beyond the August show at the moment, which is understandable, by the way. I think as soon as there's a date certain, the deal will get done.
So you believe, despite all the back and forth, that that fight. I mean, what happens if JoJo says, I'm not going to fight him? I mean, you can't necessarily make a guy get into the ring with somebody.
Then they're going to have to do something else to satisfy Tevin Farmer if JoJo just absolutely refuses to fight him. But I don't see that happening. I think JoJo's. I like JoJo. I think he's a real fighter. Guys have different ways of arguing with people and different ways of discussing things. I shouldn't even say necessarily arguing with people. Maybe they thought it was some form of negotiation, sending a letter to the IBF saying that they wanted to fight their mandatory. I think they'll sort it out with Golden Boy, and there'll be a fight before the year is over, is my guess. I mean, assuming boxing continues a normal schedule through the end of the year, I think you'd see the fight hopefully before the end of the year.
All right, lastly, this is something I don't think you and I have even talked about off the air either, but Sergio Martinez is allegedly coming back.
No, he's coming.
He's coming back. You were his promoter for most of his career.
I still consider him one of my good friends. He's still
okay. So give me your reaction to a mid-40s Sergio Martinez coming back, and are you going to be involved in it in any way?
He invited me to be involved in it. He said to me, "I'm coming back. I know you don't approve." I mean, he literally. Look, we're close friends. I love that guy, and most loyal fighter I've ever worked with, and one of the most remarkable athletes I've ever known. One of the things, and maybe this also affects his willingness to come back in a foolish way. I mean, when he came to the U.S. in the beginning and first started to establish his star power, he already was mostly a one-legged fighter. Like by the time he got here, he had one really bad leg. And that was a problem in every fight he had, which, by the way, when you look at the entirety of what he accomplished, makes it all the more remarkable. But if I was him, I would probably continue to act, continue to do stand-up comedy. He's a superstar in two countries. I mean, in terms of popularity, in Spain and in Argentina. I don't think it's about the money. I don't think he's hurting at all. He's very wise with his money. He had some very smart, good friends that invested his money, helped him invest his money very, very intelligently. When he called me, he said, "I know you don't want me to do this." I said, "I don't." And he said, "Well, we had the discussion many times. Like, it wasn't even worth repeating the reasons. But, health and safety. I'd rather see him just let his period. Like, he's definitely a Hall of Famer. Stay in retirement and just let the time tick, and you'll be, you just got on the ballot and you're going to be in the Hall of Fame. But he's like, I got to do this for me. I'm bored. I'm still a fighter. I still have it it's still in my blood. I can't help it. Like, if you want to be involved, I'm welcoming you to be involved. If you don't want to be involved, please send me a release. And I'd really like you as my friend to wish me the best and tell me you're behind me." And I am. I want to, if he's going to come back, I want to see him win. If he's going to come back, I want to see him stay healthy. That's what I want more than anything. Do I approve? It's not for me to prove. It's not my life. I'm not going to be involved. I declined. He knows how I feel. Doesn't change how much I love him. Doesn't change the fact I'm going to be rooting for him. I'm not a fighter. That line, one of the things in Rocky Balboa that I got to play with that script a little bit. With Sly let me play with that script a little bit when we were doing the movie. And one of the lines that really resonated with me when he had this exchange with his son, and his son is like, "You're crazy. You're fucking middle-aged. What are you coming back for?" And the father basically says, "Fighters fight. Fighters fight. That's what they know how to do. That's who they are." I don't think he perceives himself as an actor or a comedian he obviously has movie star looks. He obviously is charismatic, and he hasn't had any problem earning money outside of the boxing ring. But he's a fighter, and that's how he perceives himself. That's who he thinks he is. I got to tell you, I know that Tyson and Roy are both doing this for money, but I could tell you, I know both of them very, very well. Mike's not bullshitting you when he says, "I still want to get in there and hit somebody. It's still in my blood. It's still part of who I am." It's a missing part of me. I've been feeling, as much as I feel like whole, I've gotten my life together and I'm in a better place than I've been previously. I miss fighting. I'm a fighter. And Roy, Roy stayed a long time. Roy kept fighting for a long, long time. Roy's had a very hard time divorcing himself from boxing. It's who he is. I think there's a common thread in all of it. It's not just about the money for any of them. And I can promise you, by the way, that Sergio's comeback's not a big money. At least the first fight's not a big money situation at all. But I don't get it. It's puzzling to me. But I do know that fighters fight, and that's who they are. That's how they identify themselves. That's what makes their heart beat.
I don't know what this says about boxing, Lou, but if Sergio comes back and picks up a couple of low-level wins, and Julio Cesar Chavez Jr. picks up a low-level win, there will be a weird, morbid fascination with making the rematch between those two guys. I don't understand it, but I think you and I could both agree that people would actually probably watch that.
Look, I agree with you. And on that same vein, right, I did an interview yesterday. And it was with it was like not so much a boxing interview as it was a TV, like media kind of interview. And it was someone asking me to prognosticate what pay-per-view I thought would do the most buys in the fall out of what's been announced so far. And while I don't think Tyson and Roy Jones is going to be a mega event, do I think it could do more buys than anything else that's been announced so far on pay-per-view for the fall? Probably. I mean, I would think it's going to do around 500,000 people. And there's nothing else on the schedule of boxing pay-per-view in the fall that I think is going to do 500,000 people. So think about the fact that exhibition with headgear and pillow gloves between a 51-year-old man and a 55-year-old man is going to do more pay-per-view, and it's in that same category as Chavez. You know, the biggest names in boxing are the ones that are in retirement or semi-retirement. It's why the threat of Floyd's still the biggest star in boxing. It's why the threat of Floyd returning, still creates a buzz of articles and conversations.
Yeah, that's a separate topic altogether about how the young stars in boxing haven't captured the attention the way the older stars in boxing have. Lou, always appreciate it, man. I feel like we should do these more virtually because we don't yell at each other quite so much when we're not in the same room, but it's always interesting nonetheless, man. Thanks for joining me.
I also think the pandemic has mellowed me further, by the way.
Possibly, but
I think I'm a little more philosophical right now. So
that too, Lou, is temporary.
I actually hope so. Good seeing you, Chris. Enjoy the bubble, baby.